Okay, so imagine you're looking out at the global economy. It's this constantly shifting landscape, right? Kind of like sand dunes that are always reshaping in the wind. For a long time, the U.S. was like right there, on top of the biggest dune.
Hmm.
But things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And today, we're going on a deep dive to explore all the forces that are reshaping this global landscape, right? All for you.
This isn't just about like numbers on a chart, though. It really is about real world, tangible effects that we all feel. Like we're talking about everything, really everything from how much you pay for things to the like power dynamics between countries. We're even talking about the future strength of the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, that's exactly why we're here. You gave us like a whole stack of articles and research on this whole topic, right?
What?
Like on how global trade is, evolving, and we've gone through it all, so you don't have to. We're going to break it down.
And I think you'll find we found some pretty surprising trends. I mean, get this, global trade might actually shrink this year. Yeah, and there are these new power players emerging that are, I mean, they're really challenging the established order. It's fascinating.
Okay, so let's try to unpack that a little bit. So, like, to understand where we're going, we need to understand where we've come from, right? We need a little historical context.
Absolutely. Yeah, after World War II, the U.S. was, well, we were in this dominant position. We were setting the rules of the game when it came to global trade, things like the Bretton Woods Agreement and Gaiety.
So they were like, they were the architects of this global trading system as we know it today.
Exactly. Yeah, but that was then. Now we're seeing the rise of these, other major players, particularly China, India, and Brazil. And what's fascinating, I think, is that this rise, it isn't just this like economic phenomenon. It also really kind of reflects a return to historical patterns.
Interesting. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, for centuries before the whole, era of European colonialism, Asia was a major hub for global trade. And we're kind of seeing like a resurgence of that, historical dynamic.
Okay, so we've got these new players who are, they're entering the game now.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily, always playing by the old rules, right?
Not always, no. In fact, there's this growing concern among experts, a real concern, that both the U.S. and China are starting to act like what they call rogue states when it comes to, global trade. They're bending the very rules that they helped create, and that's creating a lot of, uncertainty and tension.
Right, yeah. Sounds like things are getting pretty complicated out there. So what are the main forces that are driving this shift?
Well, it's not just one thing. It really is this whole confluence of factors coming together at the same time. One of the biggest ones is this explosion of digital trade. We're talking like more than 60% of service exports are now digital. And this is only going to increase as things like AI and the metaverse become, even more integrated into the global economy.
So if the dollar loses its dominance, are we looking at higher borrowing costs? And would that potentially impact everything, from government spending to our own personal loans?
That's a real concern, yeah. It's not just about the dollar either. The U.S. is also facing challenges from these, what they call horseshoe trade routes that are emerging because of the U.S.-China rivalry. You see, companies they're trying to diversify their supply chains and, manage risk. So they're moving production away from China, to serve the U.S. market. But they're often routing goods through other countries first.
So instead of just this direct line from China to the U.S., now we're seeing all these more roundabout paths kind of emerging.
Exactly. And then you've got the issue of, protectionism, which has really been on the rise, especially since the pandemic. It really exposed vulnerabilities in global supply chains. Countries they're getting nervous and they're putting up, trade barriers like tariffs and quotas. And that makes it, obviously much harder for goods and services to flow freely.
It sounds like it's a pretty volatile mix. We've got these geopolitical tensions, digital disruption, and this trend toward protectionism all kind of happening at the same time. So what's the impact of all of this on the United States specifically?
Well, the U.S. is kind of in this unique position, right? I mean, we have this huge domestic market, which means we're less reliant on trade than a lot of other countries. But that doesn't mean that we're immune to these global shifts,
Especially when it comes to the dollar, right?
Exactly. The dollar's global dominance is being challenged, and if it loses its, its top dog status, that could have this, real ripple effect throughout the U.S. economy.
And to add to that, you mentioned earlier that the U.S. might actually be missing out on some opportunities, especially in Latin America.
Yes, that's right. While the U.S. is, focused on this rivalry with China, there's this argument to be made that we're neglecting other, potential partnerships, particularly in our own hemisphere. China has been, I mean, they've been actively strengthening their ties in Latin America, and that could have long-term consequences, real consequences for U.S. Economic and political influence in the region.
Okay, so we've got all these like moving pieces here, right? It sounds like the old rules of global trade are breaking down, but it's not really clear what's going to replace them.
Yeah, that's exactly the challenge, I think. The research that we've been diving into really highlights this sense of uncertainty, a real sense of uncertainty among experts. Some of them believe that this, current fragmentation is just a temporary phase, kind of like a readjustment before things, settle into a new normal.
So maybe the global trade landscape is just going through like some growing pains, right?
Yeah, that's one perspective. But there are also, those who are much more pessimistic. They see these disruptions as a sign that globalization, as we've known it, is it's actually unraveling. And they
Hmm.
point to, the rise of nationalism, political instability around the world, and the potential for conflict, as serious threats to the interconnected global economy we've relied on for decades.
Yeah, it's hard to know like who to believe. I mean, do you lean more towards, I guess, optimistic or pessimistic about the future of global trade?
It's tough to say definitively, honestly. I mean, there are compelling arguments, on both sides. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is that even the optimists acknowledge that we're not going back, to the way things were. The old rules of the game are gone,
Yeah.
We're really entering uncharted territory here.
Yeah. So if the old world order is like crumbling,
Yeah.
what are some of the, I guess, possible scenarios for what might replace it?
Well, one possibility is that, we move towards a more regionalized world, right? Where trade flows primarily within, large blocks of countries like BRICS Plus and RCEP. They could become, the dominant forces in global trade with, less interaction, less cooperation between them.
So instead of like one interconnected global economy, we might see a world that's kind of divided into these large, regional trading blocks. And what would that look like in practice?
I mean, imagine a scenario where, for example, the BRICS Plus bloc, which includes, these resource-rich countries like Brazil and Russia, they leverage their, collective economic power to gain more influence on the global stage, right? They might prioritize trade within their bloc and set their own standards for things like labor and, environmental regulations.
It sounds like that could create, more competition and potentially even conflict between these blocks. Is there a way to kind of avoid that kind of fractured future?
Some experts believe that what they call managed globalization might be a better path forward. So instead of letting, just market forces kind of dictate everything, governments would play a more active role in shaping, a more equitable and sustainable system of global trade.
So instead of just this like free for all, we would see more, rules and regulations, I guess, on a global scale.
Precisely, yeah. And this could involve, things like establishing global labor standards, cracking down on tax havens, investing in green technologies to address climate change. It would require, a much higher level of international cooperation than we see today.
Yeah, that makes sense. But, while we're talking about, potential future scenarios,
Yeah.
let's not forget about the technology that's already, reshaping global trade. We talked earlier about, digital trade and those unusual horseshoe trade routes. What other technological trends should we be paying attention to?
One of the most significant, I think, is the rise of platform-based trade. Driven by companies like Amazon, Alibaba, and Shopify. They're creating these digital ecosystems that connect businesses and consumers, worldwide. Essentially, they're becoming these really powerful intermediaries in global commerce.
It's like they're building their own, digital marketplaces with their own like set of rules.
That's a good analogy, and it raises some important questions about how these platforms will impact global trade. I mean, will they become so powerful that they can dictate terms to both buyers and sellers? Will they erode the power of national governments to regulate trade?
Those are some pretty big questions. It
Mhm.
sounds like technology is not only changing, what we trade, but also like how we trade.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these changes aren't just about, economics. They have these really profound social and political implications as well.
So what do you mean?
Well, think about, the impact on jobs. The automation is already displacing workers, in many industries, and the shift towards digital trade could accelerate that trend. We also need to consider the potential for increased inequality, as the benefits of globalization become more concentrated in the hands of a few powerful corporations and individuals.
So it's not just about whether, global trade, grows or shrinks. It's also about who benefits from it and who gets left behind.
Exactly. I mean, these are complex issues with, no easy answers, but one thing is certain, that the future of global trade will depend on how we as individuals and as a global community choose to navigate these challenges and opportunities.
But what can we do? Like how do we prepare ourselves for this, this uncertain future?
Well, the first step is to stay informed and engaged, right? I mean, pay attention to these trends, understand the forces at play and think, critically about the information that you're consuming. Don't just, passively accept whatever you hear from the media or social media. Do your own research. Challenge your assumptions and seek out diverse perspectives.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
It is, but it's essential if we want to be, informed citizens and make, informed decisions about our lives and our communities.
Okay, I'm with you on that. But beyond staying informed, what else can people do? What practical steps can we take to navigate this new world of trade? Okay, so we've talked about these big forces that are shaping global trade, right? We've talked about the shifting power dynamics and the rise of these new trade blocks and
Yeah.
the impact of technology. So let's bring it home now. Like, how will all of these changes affect you, the listener, in your everyday life?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? I think one of the most direct impacts that you'll see is going to be on the prices you pay for goods and services as supply chains become more complex and countries put up those trade barriers. Costs inevitably go up, and those costs, unfortunately, are often passed along to consumers.
So that new phone or that cup of coffee could start costing more. That's not exactly what I wanted to hear.
It is a real possibility,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's not just about, luxury items either. Essential goods like food and energy could also be affected. I mean, a significant portion of the food that we consume here in the US, it's imported, right? And so if those imports become more expensive, well, it puts a real strain on everyone's budget.
Okay, so that's the potential downside. But are there any potential like upsides to all this change, that we're seeing in the global trade landscape?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One potential benefit is increased competition. As new players, enter the global market, it can push companies to innovate and offer better products at lower prices. So this could lead to, more choices and better value for consumers, in the long run.
So maybe some of this disruption could actually be, good for consumers. Like it's like shaking things up forces everyone to, kind of up their game a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good way to put it. Another potential benefit is the diversification of supply chains. As companies move away from, relying solely on a single country like China for production, they become, less vulnerable to disruptions. We saw this during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Having multiple sources for goods and materials can really help, mitigate those risks.
So spreading things out, a bit could actually make the global trade system more resilient. That kind of makes sense. What about the impact on jobs and opportunities? I know a lot of people are really concerned about that.
Yeah, that's a big one for sure. I think the rise of digital trade and this whole platform-based commerce, it's creating new opportunities for entrepreneurs and small businesses to reach customers, all around the world. This could really lead to a surge in entrepreneurship and economic growth, particularly in developing countries.
That sounds promising. But I also imagine these changes are going to, disrupt a lot of existing jobs and industries, right?
You're right. The days of, relying on a single employer for your entire career are fading fast, honestly. To thrive in this new environment, individuals are going to really need to be adaptable and proactive.
So what does that look like in like practical terms? What skills should people be focusing on to prepare for this new world of work?
A commitment to continuous learning is crucial. I mean, the world is it's changing so rapidly that we need to constantly be updating our skills and knowledge. This might involve, taking online courses, attending workshops, or
Mhm.
even just reading books and articles.
It's like the schoolyard never really ends.
Yeah.
You gotta keep learning to stay ahead of the game.
Exactly. Another key skill is adaptability, right? Be prepared to pivot your career path and embrace new technologies and be open to different ways of working. The gig economy is growing and remote work is becoming more common and traditional job roles they're evolving. So the ability to adapt to these changes is going to be essential.
So like flexibility and a willingness to learn new
Mm-hmm.
things are really key. What else can people do to prepare for this new economic landscape?
I think diversifying your income streams is another smart move.
Yeah.
Don't rely solely on one source of income. Explore side hustles. Invest in your skills and your education and build a financial safety net for yourself.
That's good advice, just in general,
Mhm.
regardless of what's happening, in the global economy. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to embrace the opportunities that come with change. This new world of global trade, it's undoubtedly going to create, challenges, but it will also create, new possibilities. So, be open to exploring those possibilities and be willing to, step outside of your comfort zone.
So be proactive, be adaptable, and maybe a little bit fearless. This has been a really fascinating deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground. We've explored the historical context of global trade, the forces that are driving its transformation, the impact on the U.S., global reactions, and even some future projections.
And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. The landscape of global trade is constantly, it's constantly evolving. So stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the shifting sands of global trade. We appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.